Welcome and thank you for joining Book Depository's third sharing session here at the Hong Kong Book Fair. Today we continue with our series of Suspense at the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Centre as we welcome television producer turned author Simon Toyne. 大家好，再一次咧歡迎大家參與由 Book Depository 贊助嘅第三場閱讀分享會。今日咧我哋會繼續咧同大家分享一下咧懸疑系列㗎。咁呢個環節咧我哋邀請到曾經擔任電視製作人，搖身一變成為知名作家嘅 Simon Toyne 同大家分享嘅喎。By now, you may be familiar with me. If you're the first time tuning in, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Patricia, and I'll be your moderator today. Like many of you, I'm also a book lover. And, well, what's better than having a good book and a nice cup of coffee staying indoors under the steamy weather, right? I'm very happy, and it's really my honor to be here with you all again today. Thank you once again to Book Depository for sponsoring our event, and of course, the Hong Kong Book Fair for making all this possible. 咁唔知道咧，大家有冇參與過去嘅兩場分享會？如果有嘅話咧，可能都會見過我噶啦。如果今次係你第一次參加嘅話咧，都容許我先介紹一下自己。我係 Patricia， 今日咧都會繼續同大家咧主持閱讀分享會嘅。今次咧好開心可以咧同大家喺書展見面啦，亦都希望借呢個機會咧再一次多謝 Book Depository 去贊助我哋今日嘅活動。當然啦，仲有香港書展嘅支持，令我哋咧有一個咁開心同埋咁好嘅分享活動㗎。So for anyone with a home library, I believe this company should need no introduction. Book Depository is a leading international book retailer with over 20 million books available and free delivery worldwide. Their vision is to provide all books to all by improving the selection, accessibility, and affordability of books. 咁我相信咧，大家都係中意睇書嘅人啦。頭先可能都聽到噶啦，應該大家咧都對於呢個品牌咧好熟悉噶啦。不過等我咧同大家再重溫一下。嗱 ，Book Depository 咧係一個領先國際嘅零售書商，擁有超過2000萬本嘅書籍，仲有咧全球免運費嘅喎。咁佢哋希望咧透過佢哋嘅平台去增加書目嘅選擇，令到每個人咧都可以輕易咁揾到，亦都負擔到咧心水嘅書籍。Now, before we begin, I'd like to share a piece of good news with everyone that we here participating in the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Centre, all of you will be receiving a 20% discount voucher in the full catalog from all invited authors this year. You can take the flyer with you that you found on your seat. That looks like this. And you bring it to the Book Depository's booth in Hall 1C A16 for redemption. 嗱，頭先咧我就 show 咗一個 voucher 俾大家啦，相信大家咧如果喺現場參與嘅朋友咧就知道我呢一個咧嘅 flyer， 大家每一個嘅座位上面都有噶啦。咁分享一個好消息咧，就係如果今日咧我哋現場喺會展參與嘅朋友咧，可以得到呢一張 Book Depository 嘅獨家優惠券，咁大家咧就可以用8折嘅優惠價錢咧購買今次咧出席分享會嘅3位作家嘅任何著作。咁只要咧大家喺書展嘅期間啦，帶住呢一張嘅單張咧，去到展覽廳 1CA16 Book Depository 嘅攤位咧就可以用到噶啦。Now this session, we are at the third and final presentation in our Book Depository seminar series, which features best-selling writers from across the world. And in this session, Simon Toyne will join us to speak on dark objects. Where do ideas come from? So let me give you a brief introduction of our author today. Simon is the author of international bestsellers The Sanctus trilogy, Solomon Creed series, and Dark Objects. He's also the presenter of Written in Blood, a true crime television series where he walks in the footsteps of killers with other best-selling authors such as Tess Gerritsen and Karen Slaughter, exploring the true crimes that inspired their fiction, while Simon is truly a master of suspense both on the page and on screen. Now, before we invite Simon to join us and share with us where his darkest and most brilliant ideas come from, we want to do a little warm-up quiz with all of you. So if you're joining on set, you may want to scan the QR code just around the event space, you can see, and we'll be doing quiz session with all of you. For those of you joining us online, you can also leave your answers by typing them into the comment box, okay? All right, let's take a look at the question. The question looks like this. In Simon's novel, Dark Objects, a wealthy woman is found brutally murdered in the locked fortress of her London mansion. Surrounding her are 4 mysterious objects. Which of the following is not one of the objects found with her? Option A, a stuffed unicorn toy. Option B, a book on forensics by Dr. Lawton Rees. Option C, a set of keys. And option D, a necklace. All right, so I see many of our audience joining on site already typing in and trying to respond to this polling. Okay, let's take a look. Wow, the same percentage of our members in the audience are picking the similar answer. Oh, wow. Now, more of you picked option A, a stuffed unicorn toy. So I'll give you all 10 more seconds to respond to this question, and we'll see if there is any changes to the results. Okay, 50% of you chose option A. Wow, that's interesting. Well, and actually, what a strange assortment of items indeed. And well, it appears that majority of you picked option A, but why don't we ask the author to reveal the answer for us? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Simon Toyne. Hello, Simon. We're very delighted to have you. Welcome to Hong Kong Book Fair.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I wish I could be there in person, but, you know, looming above you, Big Brother style, I suppose, is the next best thing.
Right, but we're really happy to have you join us here. We have quite a number of people joining us here physically in Hong Kong, actually, and I know we have also a lot of audience joining us online. Would you like to say a few words to everybody coming to join our sharing session today?
Yeah, well, welcome. Welcome to Hong Kong and welcome to France. I'm coming to you via the power of technology from my office in France. I've actually watched the other two seminars yesterday with Claire McIntosh and Gillian McAllister, and so they're very good. You know, honestly, I learned things. So hopefully, I will continue and keep the level high. So if you stick around, hopefully, I can teach you some things.
I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from your sharing later. Well, I have a few questions for you first. So you hosted the CBS True Crime series Written in Blood, and I'm sure you are no stranger to appearing on screens. Can you tell us something about this TV series?
Yeah, well, before I wrote novels, I was a TV producer for many years. And when I started writing novels, I kind of left that behind me. And it's like running away to the circus, but only sort of with a laptop. A friend of mine who I'd worked with in my TV days was developing a true crime idea because, you know, lots of people love true crime and lots of people love true crime shows. And they had a big name author who I can't name, who they developed it with. And the idea was to talk to this author about the various true crimes that inspired their work. And the channel got very excited and said, yes, let's have it. That sounds brilliant. Whereupon big name author went, oh, do you know what? I don't really want to do it. It's a lot of work. I'm quite busy. So anyway, my friend, the producer, came to me and said, look, you're a writer. You know writers. Who else? What other big name author could we rope in to present this show? And I made some suggestions, but I said, you know, it doesn't matter who they are. If they're really big, they're going to be busy and not have much time. And also, there's a limit to how many true crimes will have influenced their work. You know, we're fiction writers. We make most of it up. And we might be inspired by things, but largely it's sort of, you know, it comes out of our head. So I suggested that they do a different author each episode. And I gave them some names. And so she went off and said, yeah, okay, that's great. And then came back and the channel went, that's great. We love that, but we want a presenter. What we need is someone who's going to be in every episode who's kind of doing this, effectively presenting and leading and doing what Patricia's done so beautifully there and sort of introduce things and whatever. And they said, would you do it? And having worked behind the cameras, I was slightly reluctant. I said, all right, we'll do a screen test and you know, see how it goes. So I did a screen test and I got the job. And it was brilliant. I did 2 series and effectively every episode I met a best-selling author who then told me an amazing story about something that influenced their work. And so basically I spent like a year and a half traveling around being told amazing stories by amazing storytellers. So it was great. It was a good thing. It was one of those sort of like extra kind of weird happenstances that I was very glad happened.
Right, I'm sure it's a very special experience to remember, and it's definitely gives you more inspiration to your writings and in your work, right? That's really interesting to know. Thanks for sharing. Well, before we introduced you, actually, we did a warm-up game with our audience. Would you like to respond to the results by the at the polling question? Actually, most of the people picked option A. Can you review the answer for us?
Well, it's funny. I was watching it live go out, and I don't know who's there in the audience who answered first, because immediately number D went bink, and that was it, and they were correct. Whoever that was, that must have read the book, because they were so fast, and then everyone else sort of came along. But yeah, so the correct answer was D. There is no necklace. In fact, all those other items, the keys, the unicorn toy, and the book on forensics by Dr. Lawton Rees were all found around this body. And so, yeah, no necklace, I'm afraid. But it's very interesting, I think, how that kind of leads into what I'm going to talk about, actually, because the objects in the book were sort of the starting point for me. And that was sort of the original idea, which I'm going to talk about in my thing in a minute.
Okay, so I won't stand between you and your sharing with the audience. So before I let you start your sharing, I would like to give a warm reminder to our audience again. If you'd like to discover more page turners from Simon, they are all available to purchase on Book Depository. And now let's give Simon the chance to share with us more about his career as an author, screenwriter, television host, and more. And now, without further ado, Simon, please, you may now start on your sharing on dark objects. Where do ideas come from? Over to you, Simon.
Okay, so, well, that was a lovely introduction. Thank you, Patricia. And also thank you to the Hong Kong Book Fair for having me, and also to the Book Depository. I am, as I said, I'm very honoured to be with you. I'm also sad I'm not with you, not least because I would quite like to use the 20% off thing to go in the thing and buy lots of books. Maybe it's a good thing, actually, that I'm not there, because my accountant would thank me. Anyway, dark objects. When I was asked to do this, I was asked what I'd like to talk about. I had a real think about what I thought would be useful and what might be useful for people who maybe are interested in the writing process, maybe because you're writers yourselves, or maybe just because you're interested in how a novel comes about. I mean, as a reader, before I was a writer, I often just would sort of read a book and think, man, where did that come from? And actually, when I do live events and things like this, and there will be a Q&A session at the end, one of the questions I'm always asked, and all authors are all asked, is where do your ideas come from? And it's quite a simple question, but it's got quite a complex answer, because they kind of come from everywhere. And I think people are sort of hoping that there's some magic trick to sort of coming up with an idea that then becomes a novel. But unfortunately, I'm sorry to sort of dash that hope to the ground, but there is no easy way. Ideas sort of come from everywhere. And in some ways, that's quite a comforting thing, because I think what happens is, so here's my books kind of arranged. It's like my life flashing behind me. But this is my office in France, as I said. And so I wrote my latest book, Dark Objects, a lot of it here. And I think what happens is people see a finished book like this, sort of 400 odd pages, lots of characters, lots of plot, lots of twists, and think that as a writer, we come up with this whole thing in one go, or largely in one go, that it comes fully formed, from the ether or wherever, from inspiration. And like nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, what this is effectively is not just one idea, it's a whole bunch of ideas that slowly kind of coalesce and over a long period of time and with a lot of hard work become a book. So I thought it'd be useful as a starting point to kind of talk about, seeing as this is my latest book, so it's uppermost in my mind, the kind of origin story, the genesis of this particular book. And largely, I think sort of, people do kind of, I'm going to move to the next slide, but people do just sort of kind of, hang on, is it working? People do put a lot of store in ideas, that moment of inspiration, the light bulb moment, and think, oh, that's the thing, that's the light from God that suddenly, presents this thing entire. And I kind of want to just get rid of that myth, because I think it's really unhelpful. And the question, where do ideas come from, is sort of the wrong question, because we all have hundreds of ideas every day, even on a small level. You know, you have an idea that you want a ham sandwich, for example, on a very sort of basic domestic level. You know, you have an idea that you might want to go on holiday to somewhere you've never been before, and you start looking it up on the internet. You know, ideas are quite commonplace. It's the real question I think any creative should ask is, which idea is the one that is good enough, that's going to sustain a whole story and your interest as a writer and a reader's interest when they read a book for whatever 400 odd pages, and that's the question. It's not where do ideas come from, it's with all of this kind of, you know, massive ideas that are kind of bombarding us every day, how do we pick the right one? And so what I intend to do is kind of go through how I did that with Dark Objects, and hopefully you'll sort of give you an insight into sort of a way that maybe you can, you know, kind of synthesize the same thing yourself. Because kind of going to the next slide, you know, we have, so there's, you know, the light bulb, the single pinpoint of light. And this, I just, you know, there's the galaxy, the universe, the solar system, whatever. It's like a, you know, look at all those pinpoints of light. In a sense, all of those are ideas. And every single one of those pinpoints of light is a planet or a sun or a star or a solar system or even just a bunch of kind of luminous gases. And I kind of have a very deep belief really in universal truths, that it's in all of my books. I kind of sort of think that when you're writing a book or trying to tell a story to someone, what you're trying to do is connect to them on a very human level. You're trying to write a story that someone responds to emotionally, intellectually. And the way to do that is, so, you know, I'm speaking to you now in France, I'm from the UK, you're in Hong Kong, you know, culturally very different. And yet we're all kind of united with our love of stories. And I think the thing about a story, a good story, is it's universal. It contains at its heart some sort of universal truth that we can all respond to as humans. And going on that sort of massive universal level, you know, the universal truth comes from the universe. In fact, my third book, reaching back, The Tower, in which I blew up the James Webb Telescope, which is thankfully not blown up and is now floating above us and sending amazing pictures of things exactly like this. The whole thing was, the central premise of that was people started behaving very strangely on Earth and no one could work out why. And this bunch of kind of religious zealots saw the James Webb Telescope as the new Tower of Babel, reaching up and trying to see the edge of heaven, trying to see the face of God, and thought it was heresy and tried to stop it. And within that, the central idea of that was this idea that the reason we were all changing the way we were behaving, everyone sort of had this very strong homing instinct, is because the nature of the universe had changed. And I really believe that, you know, if you look at we live in a very expansive, expanding universe, and actually, as humans, we're very expansive. You know, we like to see what's over the horizon. We like to sail seas. We like to discover new things. So I think, you know, our universal impetus, our universal natures, reflect what is happening in the universe we live in, i.e. it's constantly expanding and getting wider. And really our intellectual curiosity is the same. You know, you start off with something, you learn something, you find out about something, and you want to know more about it. You know, you want your knowledge to this thing to slowly expand. And so sort of with that kind of framework explained, I kind of wanted to then show you how that same sort of universal nature of how, you know, with that, I should have moved on. I'm going to go back actually. You know, that picture of the universe, every one of those points of light started off on a tiny level, on a molecular level, with two molecules of something coming together, often with an explosion and creating light and heat, or fusing together and creating something new, a new element or whatever. And so all of those enormous heavenly bodies floating out there, all of those constellations of enormous things started off as a tiny, tiny thing, as a tiny reaction, as a tiny collision between two things. And that, I think, is, for me, is where ideas come from. It's where everything is born. You know, in the same way the universe is born and stars are born and planets are born, ideas on a very much smaller level, you know. And, you know, effectively, this is my planet. This is the planet that I have created over a couple of years of writing and rewriting and whatever. And really, it is a collection of ideas slowly forming and coming together, starting as a sort of amorphous gas and slowly cohering into something solid. And so what I'm going to do now is go through those two atomic things, and there are two that came together to create the spark that ultimately became Dark Objects. So there is the cover. That is the same book. The one in the middle, the brighter one, is the UK cover. I'm not exactly sure which cover you have there, but either way, look for either of these. And the one on the right is the American cover. It's the same story, just a different cover. But the genesis of both of them was the same. So whistling through this slide, I'm now going to go to the first of these ideas, the first sort of little molecular thing. And interestingly, it came from the thing that I was just talking to Patricia about, which was Written in Blood, the true crime series I did. And like while I was doing it and learning all about these amazing cases with various people, the one thing I kept saying, and I had to stop saying it because it just became sort of almost like I was a parrot saying the same thing, is how truth was stranger than fiction. There were so many times when I was going into these true crime cases that I would find out a piece of information or something that someone did. And I know that if I put it in a book, my editor would just go, "Oh, no one's going to believe that. That's totally, wholly unbelievable. You can't do that." And yet there it was. It actually happened. As I did sort of expanding, as I said to kind of Patricia as well, the thing about the series I did, Written in Blood, was it was a good way of kind of refreshing the palate in some ways, because you get very locked in with ideas and with writing a book on one idea and making that idea work, and, you know, working on the characters and everything. And it was just a joy to spend time with the authors. And also, you know, the other thing which was very useful, and I don't know if you can get it over there, but it was very illuminating for me, because you can see, so like in the top right corner, me standing there in a library with Tess Gerritsen, author of the Rizzolian Isles thing, who we were in Oregon, and she told me this amazing story about an actual family of serial killers. Again, if I put that in a book, they'd go, "Family of serial killers? Are you mad?" But no, there was one, and she told me all about it. In the bottom there, in matching fetching black, myself and Karen Slaughter, who's a brilliant writer, who took me on a journey across Georgia, where in the 70s, a guy called Paul John Knowles went on a murder spree. He was also known as the Casanova Killer. And he was very charming, and he actually got a British journalist, female journalist, to sort of fall in love with him in the middle of his spree and start taking notes and basically writing the story of him, because he saw himself as this sort of cavalier, sort of like Robin Hood legendary figure, even with the name, the Casanova Killer. And, you know, again, that's kind of, it's like a woman is going to, even knowing what he's doing, is going to go along in a Bonnie and Clyde fashion. It's sort of stretches belief. And then on the other corner there, you can just see, sandwiched between the cameraman and myself, wearing a suit that I would not be wearing today because it's very hot here, as I believe it is with you, is Peter James, author of the Roy Grace series, set in Brighton, where I also live half the year. And you know, talking to all of these amazing storytellers, telling these amazing stories, and also getting a chance to talk to them off camera about how they worked and where their ideas came from, made me realize that actually, you know, there is thankfully, happily, a universality in that as well. They all, even though they write books in different ways, and may, you know, the process of getting from idea to finished book may be slightly different, the sort of genesis of the idea of learning something or discovering something that becomes a spark that starts something else, and you know, effectively it's the grit in the oyster that becomes the pearl, is all the same. You know, they all sort of, they all start off with a something that interests them. And that, I think that's a kind of very useful note, is that, you know, as a person, as a reader yourself, if you come across a piece of information or anything that interests you, that you find intriguing, chances are someone else will also be interested in that thing. It will inspire their curiosity in the same way that it does yours. And so then, you know, just by very nature of the fact that you're interested in it, you're onto something. And they all did it. And so anyway, through the course of making this show, I did an episode with an author called Mason Cross, who is he's a brilliant writer. If you haven't discovered him, I would grab one of his books. They're all great, all good thrillers. And anyway, the inspiration for one of them was, which I think was The Killing Season, which is maybe his first book, I'm not sure. But anyway, was based on a true crime that had happened in the area of Glasgow where he was born and grew up and still lives, which is Cambuslang in Glasgow. And so these stills are from making that episode. And he remembers it because it happened in the early 80s when he was still a kid. But he remembers the police knocking on his door and talking to his dad and asking, you know, where he'd been on the night of, kind of thing. And so that was the thing that stuck in his head that turned into his book. And interestingly enough, through the course of learning about this particular case, it gave me the spark that ultimately, the first one of the two sparks that became Dark Object. So I'm going to tell you the story of that a little bit, just so you can kind of have a bit of context. And it was a double murder in the early 80s. And on the evening of November 30th, 1982, a minicab driver, a female minicab driver in her 30s, was found stabbed to death in her cab. And she was in the boot of the car. She'd been strangled and stabbed. And on the back seat of the car, they found her handbag, her purse. And what had happened is the killer had taken every item out and laid it in a very neat line on the back seat. Now, initially, the police, because the victim had actually spent time in prison, she had been involved in a scam. She'd worked for a local newspaper and got involved in basically fixing a quiz, like a spot the ball soccer quiz, where there was a photo and you had to kind of put a cross where you thought they erased the ball, and you had to, from the arrangements of the players, figure out where the ball was, put a cross. And if you guessed exactly right, you would win quite a bit of money. And so because she worked there and she could see where the ball was, she would tell friends where to put the cross and they would win the money and then they'd share it. And so I think over a period of a couple of years while she was working there, they managed to embezzle about 140 odd thousand pounds, which was, in the early 80s was quite a lot of money. Still quite a lot of money now. So she'd been caught, she'd gone to prison, and then she'd come out and was rebuilding her life and working as a minicab driver when she met her untimely end. Now, because of her past, the police kind of didn't. There's a funny thing, and police will say all crimes are the same, but they're not. Like if a crime is committed against someone who is themselves a criminal, there's just a human nature, natural response to think, well, they chose that life. They're in that world. They knew the risks. And so if there's a toss-up between investigating the murder of a fine, upstanding member of community who has got no criminal record and someone who has spent time in prison, the person with no criminal record is going to get more resources. It's just a fact of life. And so as a result of the fact that she had, this woman, Catherine McCord, had a criminal record, they were investigating it, but they were very much sort of seeing it as maybe a crime land, underworld, organized crime sort of thing. They thought maybe she'd got in with the wrong people, maybe she'd owed some people money, and that's why they'd gone through the purse looking for money. And so they were investigating it, but not very strenuously. But then a month later, beginning of December, another woman was found murdered. And this time, this was the flip side of that coin I just described. Fine, upstanding woman, mother of a daughter, no criminal record. She was just coming home late from work one night, about 11 o'clock at night, midnight, and she was walking from the train to her house, which was not very far away. In that short walk, someone had grabbed her, dragged her to a railway embankment, stabbed her, strangled her to death, and then removed her clothes and tied them in knots, and again laid them in a very neat line by the body. Now, initially, even though they were in the same area and even though these objects had been left in a line by the body, the police did not connect the two cases. However, because this second victim was someone who was seen as having more value, for want of a better word, the response was much greater. They started knocking on doors, which was when Mason Cross remembers his dad getting the knock on the door, with the police, going door to door, asking if anyone had seen anyone, if they'd heard anything, if they'd seen anything suspicious. And they'd also set up a small caravan, like a kind of trailer, in the center of Cambuslang, as a sort of an incident room, a kind of mobile investigation unit, so that it was a presence there and people could just go in and give information. Now, into this command center at the center of Cambuslang came a man in his 20s called Ian Schooler, who said he'd seen someone suspicious, hiding in the bushes near where the second victim was killed. And he went on to give a description and a time, and the police wrote it all down. And however, of course, because this witness had seen this suspicious person, it also placed them near the scene of the crime at around about the right time. However, the witness who'd come forward, Ian Schooler, had said, No, I was on my way home. I got home by about 11. So I wasn't, by the time the murder happened, which was put at about midnight, I was at home. But doing their routine checks, the police rang his mum, because basically he still lived at home, this guy, who was a bit of an odd guy, but, there's lots of odd guys, doesn't mean anything. But they rang the parents, and the mother said, oh no, he was out till 1 o'clock that night. In fact, when he wasn't home by 1 o'clock, I went out in my car looking for him and found him walking the streets. And he said he'd been at a friend's house talking about things, and then he'd gone to the park to think things over. So immediately the story doesn't add up. And then he changed his story a bit, and the police was very suspicious. And then fatefully, the mother got really upset about this, as did the dad. And they, because they were sort of from a good, well-to-do family as well. And they wrote to the chief of police saying, we are being harassed. People keep asking my son these questions. All he was trying to do was be helpful. The mother actually went into the control center, this caravan, and said, you'll be blaming him for that minicab driver next. Whereupon the police went, hang on a minute. Objects laid out beside a corpse, same location, same MO. Neither woman was sexually molested. Both were strangled, both were stabbed. And there's these strange objects left. So they got a warrant, went to Ian Schooler's bedroom in his mum and dad's house, and found a pair of trousers that had some fibers that matched the first victim's coat. It was like a kind of fake fur coat she had, and they matched exactly. So they arrested him and tried him, and he went to prison for a long time, and end of story. However, during the filming of these episodes, one thing we always did was we also interviewed the investigating officers, because they told a lot of the story too. It was their story as well. And one of the things the lead investigator said at the time just was that little spark in my head that I kind of grabbed. And what he said was, normally at a crime scene, you're not exactly sure what the killer has touched, where they've walked. And the first thing you do is you try and preserve the scene, and you dust and you get the luminol out and try and find, sort of evidence, trace evidence of where they've been, where they've touched. Hopefully that will give you a bit of evidence that will ultimately lead to the identification and arrest of the killer. In this case, he said, uniquely, you knew in both cases that the last person to touch those objects that had been so carefully laid out beside both victims was the killer. So they immediately, these sort of, kind of like fairly mundane objects, I think in the purse was an inhaler, a set of keys, suddenly took on immense value in the framework of a murder investigation. And it was that thing of like these objects take on huge value that just lodged in my head, and I just kind of never thought of that before. And I just thought about, and the other thing they said was, of course, the objects in this case started to tell the story of what had happened. And we all know about forensics now. Forensics is a huge part of investigating, and also a huge part of crime fiction as well, because it's part of the police procedure of investigating any case. But it's really interesting. It's like, so long, if you think about it, in an investigation, you may know the identity of the victim, but you don't know the identity of the killer. You're trying to establish the identity of the killer, and it's often objects, things that were left behind, things they touched that will tell the story or lead the way, almost like the kind of, the crumbs through the forest in a fairy tale. They're the things that ultimately will lead you to the solution. And so just those kind of parallels on a investigation front, and also in coming up with a story and creating a crime mystery. I just liked that sort of the synergy of that, and the kind of parallels. And so that was the first of these kind of sparks. And before, obviously, as a crime writer and a missed someone, I always like to leave you on a cliffhanger. So my cliffhanger is, what is the second thing? What would be the second thing that came together that kind of created Dark Objects? But before we do that, we have another quiz for you, just to sort of wake you up and get you involved, because I'm sure it's hot there and you're all got your masks on. So we're going now to ask this question, which I believe I'm handing over again to Patricia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simon. That was a really frightening story that you just shared. And we'll now take a short break and let you catch your breath and maybe drink some water before you move on with the second part. And now we would like to invite our online audience and those of you joining us here physically in Hong Kong to scan the QR code. And also, for those of you joining online, you can place your answers in the comment box. And the question for you here is, which setting gives you chill in a fiction? Option A is cemetery, option B is old mansion, option C is attic, and option D is basement. And we'll see which of the four options gets the most votes. Okay, let's take a look at the polling results. We should have it here on screen. Wow. For now, majority of our audience picked basement. Well, I thought would be option A, because I find it gives me the chill. And well, actually 4 of them would be scary, but I'm surprised that no one picked option C. Interesting. All right, so most of them picked basement. Simon, are you surprised by the results?
I'm not. I'm sort of used to being constantly surprised by, whenever I guess anything. I'm terrible at, I always guess it wrong. No, I'm surprised no one picked attic.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously,
no
one's read Jane Eyre, because attics contain some scary things. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I find attics a bit scary, just because they're generally cobwebby and full of stuff and dark and dingy and dusty. I mean, basically an attic is a basement on the top of a house. So I would have thought basement and attic would be similarly. Also, I often find basements quite comforting, because normally in a basement is where the laundry is done. And so it's got that nice warm smell, feel of, quite cozy. Stephen King famously wrote Carrie, his first book, not in a basement. He lived in a trailer, but he basically they had no office, no space. And so he sat in the laundry area of this basement, this trailer he lived in, and wrote Carrie just sort of perched on the washing machine. So yeah, I know I find basements quite comforting. However, the fact that lots of people picked old mansion is interesting and leads me nicely onto part 2 of my presentation. Shall I launch right into it?
Yes, please. Over to you again, Simon.
Okay, so yes. Well, so mine, moving on to sort of next 2, it's like, mine's not an old mansion, but it is a mansion. And the second thing, to answer the cliffhanger question before that break, The second thing that came together with the idea of these objects being touched by the killer and having value was actually location, which is kind of rare, because normally what happens to me is I have half an idea and then I start thinking about who it happens to. I'll have maybe a situation or a mystery or something, and then the first thing I do is start thinking who is going to go on the journey to discover the answer to whatever that question is. But in this case, I didn't. I started thinking about the victim, like who is this person who's dead, and what are these objects surrounding her. And initially, so when I wrote the idea down, it was initially called a history. It was called a history of a murder in 10 objects. And I had this idea of this body. I'm very visual because I've sort of come from TV background, but I had this idea of a body lying somewhere, and surrounding them this almost kind of constellation of objects, 10 objects, weird objects. And so each one would tell a bit of the story until ultimately the mystery was revealed of who this person was, why they were killed, and who killed them. But actually, as soon as I had that idea, initially I just thought it's quite a cluttered image. It's very cluttered, 10 objects, body, 10 objects. And I just started thinking it's going to take a long time to go through all those and have 10 distinct stories. So I kind of boiled it down to 4, each placed at a point of the compass around the body. And then visually, I just thought that's cleaner. That sort of looks better. It's sort of easier. 4 objects feels, different directions. I liked the whole imagery of almost going on journeys to the 4 corners of the compass to find different bits of information, because all stories really are a journey somewhere or towards, greater knowledge. And that's why we like them. We like going on journeys of discovery. But then as I sort of visually pulled back more, so I had the objects and I had a victim, and I didn't know who the victim was, and I didn't really know what the objects were yet. And I just sort of started thinking about the canvas of this, and I thought, well, what if it's in a messy old mansion with wooden floors, parquet floors, and old furniture and figurative wallpaper and stuff. I just thought it's very cluttered. There's lots of stuff in there. And also, if you had an old mansion that's full of stuff, it'd be quite hard to find something that you would immediately go, these objects do not belong here. So I went the other way, and I just thought what I need is a hyper modern mansion, one of those white box, glass, steel, white floor, resin floor, hardwood, just like with nothing in it, almost no pictures, almost no furniture, certainly no clutter, just a white box. And as soon as I thought of that this is where this needed to happen, that's when those 2 molecular things came together, the objects and the location. And the thing was, and drawing, a lot, as I said at the beginning, most of the inspiration for these things, you've got to do it. It's got to be universal. It's got to chime with your own experience. And in this case, I knew the mansion because I'd already seen it. In fact, because I'm doing the promotion for Dark Objects at the moment, is what I did as part of the promotion and sort of, dusting off my old TV producer credentials. I made a video. I went to the actual house and made a video telling the story, the origin story. So I'm going to give myself another little sneaky break now, and I'm going to play you that video. I used to live here. I mean, not here, obviously that would be weird. This is a cemetery, and that would be a bit bizarre even for a thriller writer. No, I'm in this part of London, Highgate, which as the name suggests is quite high. It's on Highgate Hill. Actually, I never lived here, it's far too posh. I lived at the bottom of the hill in Archway. Rich people now live in the penthouses of big skyscrapers. Back in Victorian times, the same principle applied. You lived somewhere high. Above all the smog that was created down below there, in the bowl that is Greater London. That's where the factory workers would live. And up here in Highgate, above it all, that's where the factory owners would live. And not only did they live here, they were also buried here. And when I lived in Archway, I always used to come up here. And always on those walks, I would see the amazing old houses and the amazing new houses that are built
right up against the cemetery. And there's one in particular that always caught my eye.
Built on land released in the 60s when the cemetery's finances were straining, the house is like a glass box spaceship that's landed in the Victorian graveyard. When I lived here, I often wondered what went on inside these glass walls that look out onto this enchanted forest filled with crooked gravestones. That's the house that obsessed me. That's the house I wondered what went on inside. And that is the house of a heart of dark objects.
So I hope that's finished now. So moving on. Hang on. Right, so there you go. So that is my mansion. I'd walk past it loads of time and I'd always, as I said in the video, just kind of wondered about it. It was so weird. I mean, look at it there. That's just a weird thing, isn't it? It looks like a kind of spaceship that's landed in a Victorian graveyard. And it is actually, as you saw from the video, I walked right past it. In fact, there's signs on it saying, "We are not animals. This is not a zoo. Kindly don't look in." So, which is why I was filming it slightly, kind of surreptitiously, and why I was slightly blurred. But no, I mean, who wouldn't be fascinated and intrigued by something like that? You're walking through this Victorian graveyard and you come across that. You're gonna just, like, I don't care who you are, you're gonna go, that is intriguing. I'm curious about that thing. And even though I'd never sort of written it down or kind of like set anything, I had often wondered who lived there and what went on there. And I actually, so when I had the notion of this woman, the image of a victim, of a woman brutally murdered, lots of blood against white with these objects around her, I just thought of this. It sort of came flying in, the second element, and kind of point of collision. And I just thought, that's it. I know I have my crime, I have my objects, and I have where it happens. And so that was the seed. And just by thinking it and just sort of, normally what happens when you have that little thing, the two things that collide, that's enough. That's the seed that will start you doing what I call the what-ifing. Where you start asking what if, questions. You start asking lots of questions. You interrogate that tiny idea and try and and then more things coalesce around it. And so it was like, who is this victim? Who has killed her? Why have they left these objects around? What are the objects? What do they lead to? And through that, you ask questions and answer those questions, and slowly you start to build a plot. And, also who is going to find out? Who is going to discover? Who is going to solve this mystery? And then ultimately, it ends up as this. And if you can kind of see as well, they sort of followed the thing through. There is the book. In fact, so ultimately I ended up with mine. So my objects, I finally found out, as sort of was hinted at the first question before I began my presentation. The objects were a child's unicorn toy, and the victim is childless. So that shouldn't be there. Some World War II medals, and a set of keys that fit no lock in the house. And the fourth thing is a book on forensics by this eminent criminologist called Dr. Lawton Rees, who is single mum. She's very young, but she's very brilliant. And she also never works live cases, ever, because of a trauma that happened to her when she was younger. Because the killer who left these objects also leaks pictures of them to the press. And look at that picture. If the press got that picture and then a picture of a body with weird objects around it, any newspaper around the world is going to have a field day. It's a story that people are going to read. It will sell newspapers. And lo and behold, it becomes a huge media sensation. And this very reclusive woman, Lawton Rees, gets pulled into it. Not least because she's the estranged daughter of the chief of the Metropolitan Police, so the top cop in London. And she realizes that unwillingly she is now, in the spotlight, and the best and quickest way for her to get back out of the spotlight and into her nice, shadowy, quiet, tucked away, safe academic life is to break her golden rule and to help the investigation and help solve it as quickly as possible. But the more she starts investigating, the more she looks into these dark objects around this woman who also has no identity. They don't even know who she is because the house was bought through a shell company. There's no trace of her. Her husband's missing and is the obvious victim, but there's no evidence of him. There's all of these mysteries tied up. And as Lawton Rees is trying to solve this case and try and find out the answers to those questions, she realizes that the objects also are references to the trauma that happened to her when she was a child, when she was 15. And she has a daughter now who's also 15, and she's fearing that the same thing is going to happen, and this killer has targeted them, and her life was ruined once, and maybe it's going to be ruined again. So she needs to solve this case. So that's quite a lot of story, but it all came back down to the things that I've outlined. Sort of that all came from the what ifing of who's this going to happen to, and what's the story, and what are the objects, and you sort of think about those, and it's exciting answers suggest themselves. And again, as we're all readers first, we've all read far more than we've written, and as a reader first, you go, oh, that's interesting. I'd be interested in that. I wouldn't see that coming. And so they're the things really that suggest themselves as further elements to the story. It's almost like the initial thing, the little thing, the first spark of the idea is a pebble being dropped into a pond, and then everything kind of starts radiating out from it. Again, like the universal principle of an expanding universe. So there is my very simple, if you can reduce it to an algorithm or a formula, that is it for dark objects. So for dark objects, the formula that started the chain reaction that became the book was the crime, the true crime case that I learned about through Mason Cross and the series Written in Blood with the objects. The location, which is where I used to live and walk past, and was always a big question mark of what it was, who was this, who lived there, what happened there. And the collision of those two things became the idea. And so very specifically in answer to the question of, where do your ideas come from? Well, in that case, it was those two things together. And I just thought, I just also wanted to, having kind of outlined that, and hopefully sort of giving you an idea of a way into sort of generating your own ideas, of like putting things together. Because again, in the universal principle, one thing we know about drama is all about conflict. It's about things coming together that shouldn't really be together. It's about the sparks that fly when things that are not simpatico rub against each other. It's the sparks that fly, and that's the things we're interested in. And so in the same kind of thing is, getting a good idea is finding two things that don't necessarily go together and putting them together and seeing what happens. And so that's the genesis of dark objects. But what I wanted to do, so here's the simple thing: A plus B, this is the formula, equals idea. So if you don't write anything else down, write that. A plus B equals a light bulb. That's all you need to know. And as proof of concept, I thought what I'd do is go back to my very first book, way back here, Mr. Time, which is Sanctus, which is the book I wrote when I stopped being a TV producer and started being a full-time writer. And that came about really because I'd always wanted to write a book. I love reading, love thrillers, love crime books, loved all kinds of books. And I just thought I always wanted to write a book and never got round to it. And I think part of that was because in TV, I was doing a very, very, very creative job, and I sort of had no creative juice left at the end of the day. I know lots of authors write their books whilst working, a lot of lawyers or journalists or whatever. But because I was an executive producer coming up with ideas, I was head of development for a big UK independent production company. Everything was going into coming up with ideas or making things work or whatever. And so I thought, if I write a book, it probably won't be very good because I'm tired. It'd be like spending your day running marathons and then trying to run a marathon in the evening, and thinking you're going to have a good time. I just knew it wasn't going to happen. So I said to my kids were young at the time and weren't at school. So I said, why don't I'll quit my job and we'll save a bit of money and I'll try and I'll get this book out of my system one way or another. I'll try and write a book, and either it'll be terrible and I'll go, fine, forget that, that's not going to happen, or I'll have something and at least I'll have tried it. And so to sort of make it more of an adventure, we rented our place out in Brighton in the south of England. And with the money, the rental money, we rented something in France so that we could have a little adventure. And as we were driving to this rental, we drove through a place called Rouen, sorry, my mistake, Freudian slip, Rouen, which is in sort of northwest France. And as I was going there, I was thinking, what am I going to write now? And I'd sort of had some ideas that were very close to my own experience, you know, sort of TV producer accidentally films a crime and then is on the run, saving his family, that kind of thing, you know, more of a Harlan Coben-esque sort of domestic drama. But then as we were driving through Rouen, I saw what is that middle picture, which is the spire of Rouen Cathedral. And which is, if you've ever seen it, I mean, that picture, because the angle doesn't really do it justice, it's incredibly skinny and incredibly tall and black and almost like a hypodermic needle sort of piercing the sky. It's very foreboding and very striking. And because we were driving through Rouen, and I was thinking, you know, my head was open to coming up with an idea, the quote, which is next to it, popped into my head. And I'd read that quote years ago. I'd read it and just thought it was very clever and very interesting and intriguing, which is, a man is a god in ruins. And because of that play on words, which caught me out just then, Rouen and ruin, I just thought, what if Rouen was a place and a man, there was a god, or a man who was a god, or people believed a god was a god and was in a place called Rouen. And that, again, that was the collision. The collision of two things came together that really didn't belong together, and I certainly didn't intend to put them together. And so then I thought, okay, there's a place called Rouen, and there's a secret in it, and it's something to do with religion, and it could be a god, or it's certainly divine, and it's in a monastery that people go in and no one ever come out, and people don't even know it's a tourist place, but people don't even know if this thing exists, but it's, you know, that all of modern Western religion is kind of built on it. And slowly that, and I worked backwards and thought, who's the best person to try and find an ancient historical mystery that's been kept in a place full of men and no woman has ever set foot? A woman, that would be the hardest person. And so I got my protagonist. So everything came back from the collision of those two ideas and became the book that was Sanctus and turned me into a full-time writer. So it's the same principle. It's that formula again. A plus B equals idea. In this case, a quote plus, again, a location. Obviously, locations work for me. That then became the initial idea from which, you know, all of the other things came out, and then ultimately came back together again as a sort of agglomeration of ideas and thoughts that turned into the book. And I've talked for long enough, and you're probably getting very sleepy because it's hot. I'm sure you've got aircon there. I don't here, so I'm getting hot and I'm running out of water. So I'm just going to wrap up now, because if I can give you one more piece of advice, which is something that I absolutely stick by, because the idea for Dark Objects really only came about because I'd written Written in Blood, when I came across that crime, I wrote down the details in my ideas book. I have an ideas book, which is it's not here. It's in my thing over there. I have an ideas book which I keep by me with a pen, and I just jot things down. Anything, like a bit of conversation you ever hear, a word sometimes, a title that comes to you, a piece of information that you see online that's just as intriguing. I'll just write them all down. And I keep a document on my laptop as well, and I put, copy links into things that when I'm wasting time and should be working, and on the internet, which we all do. Here we are now. I will copy links in and just a brief piece of description about what it is. And the thing is, whenever I finish a book, I always kind of feel like I've got nothing left. It's all on the page. I'm never going to write another book, and all authors feel the same. And what I do is I go rummaging through the ideas drawer, effectively. I open my book and I kind of go through it, and I go through my documents and I look at stuff. And that's when you're reminded of something that you've kind of forgotten, but is still there. And also having them all together is immediately doing that thing of juxtaposing two things that don't necessarily go together, which could create that collision, that A plus B equals idea. And so my final thought that I will leave you with before we go to the Q&A, where you can ask me more questions, There, A plus B equals idea. There it is again. I should have done that earlier. Apology, but you know. But this is the thing I will leave you with, which is written on a post-it next to my computer, along with very many other things. And it is an ancient Chinese proverb: the faintest ink is more powerful than the strongest memory. And this is true, no matter how good your memory is, you will, through the circumstance of wherever you find yourself, maybe forget that thing. So putting them together in something which is specifically designed to encapsulate ideas, you can even put a little light bulb on it if you like, is sort of my top tip, really, is like put these little elements, collect these elemental things, these little things that intrigue you, and put them in a book or put them in a document. And whenever you need inspiration, that's where you go to. You get ideas from things that you are interested in. That's where ideas come from. And so I will now stop talking and let you talk. And you can now, I think there's you can kind of, is there a, hang on, who's moving? I've clicked on it. Oh, there's the ideas. Look, see, light bulb on the book. You need those. Right, there you go. So I think if you scan the QR code, or I think the questions have been coming in during the course of me chatting, I will now answer anything you care to throw at me.
Yes, we have been receiving a lot of questions. But before that, let's give a big round of applause to thank Simon for the excellent sharing and all the advice. Well, A plus B equals ideas, and always important to, try to link and make unusual combinations for creativity. And I love how you wrap up the presentation with the oldest Chinese proverb that actually relates to creativity. Thank you so much, Simon. Okay, we've been receiving a lot of questions, but when we are selecting the questions, you can still scan the QR code and submit your questions. And for those of you joining us online, you can also type your questions in the chat box, and our moderator will help in selecting the question for Simon here. All right, Simon, I actually have a few questions here for you. And I have my phone with me, just so you know, so that we get the instant questions from our online and on-site audience. All right, the first question, two questions actually asked about the mansion. Let me ask them all together. All right, the questions are, the mansion is made of glass. Did you get to see if there is anyone inside? And the other question was, did you ever think about meeting the mansion owner to ask why he or she lives there?
Well, you can see inside it. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. You're standing there in Highgate Cemetery, and you can see the furnishings inside. It struck me again so at the start of the book, the body is discovered by the cleaner. What happens is it's at night, and the killer is in the graveyard, hiding amongst the kind of topsy-turvy gravestones and in amongst the foliage. Because it's like a forest, it's like an enchanted forest full of gravestones. It's not like a normal cemetery. It's not neat and tidy. It's like an old wood with loads of graves in it. And so I liked the idea that the killer could watch the discovery of the body, and he kind of needs to sort of see. He needs to see that what he's left behind is undisturbed. That the cleaner doesn't clean it up or anything, because the way everything's arranged is very specific. So immediately I put the reader in that position where you are standing out in the graveyard at night, looking up at this kind of glowing box and seeing this discovery, this thing happening. So the real one. So again, the real location very much inspired the choreography of the opening scene. It's funny. Because when I walk through, as I said in my intro after the video, there is a sign that says, "Please don't take photos." This says no photographs. So I sneakily filmed it. It says, "Please don't take photographs. Please don't look at us. We're not animals in a zoo. Please respect our privacy," which I totally get. But the thing is also, if you're buying a house that's literally in a graveyard, one of the most famous graveyards in London, it's the equivalent of of what's that graveyard in Paris where Jim Morrison's, I'm blanking, but it's sort of, it's so many famous people are buried there that they do tours. People go and you can buy a ticket to do a tour, and if there's a map showing you where all the famous people are buried, and the path goes right past. You saw in the video, it goes literally, there's the corner of the house and the path goes right by it. Like, I defy anyone not to look in it. I mean, I get the need for privacy, but if you're going to buy a house and live there, it's like if you buy a house on a flight path, you should not start moaning about aircraft noise. It's like, it's just the way it is. So the note sort of I was tempted to just knock on the door and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to do this, but I figured they might just go, no, absolutely not. My lawyers will be in contact. So I just used stuff that was in the public domain. If you look up the Eldridge House, then or Glass Mansion, Highgate Cemetery, it will come up, and there's loads of articles about it. There's loads of interesting articles about why it was built. Basically the cemetery was running out of money in, I think, the 60s, and so they sold a bit of land as a development plot that had been the caretaker's cottage, the groundkeeper. So it was like a shed full of tools. So they sold that bit of land, and it was bought, and that house and another one next to it was built on it. So it's kind of strange, the genesis of it, anyway. But I think, again, also it's sort of, I kind of don't need. I'm not telling the story of the people in that house. I'm telling, the house is just a setting. People understand it's a work of fiction, and I think sometimes you get you can tie yourselves in knots trying to be too respectful for the truth, for want of a better word. So if I kind of knew the people that would live where, I think it would made it harder for me to set this story in motion. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the Miller House. In the book, it's called the Miller House because the Millers live there. Kate Miller, who's the victim, and her husband, and so it takes on a new identity. So yes, I was put off knocking on the door by the signs pretty much saying "go away." So yeah.
All right. So I hope that answers your question for whoever who asked it. But yeah, best just find out more in your book. All right, we have many more questions coming in. Okay, this one asks, what actionable advice do you have for writers who want to create suspense without making it cliche?
That's a really good question, and actually it's really hard because you inevitably, you'll sort of fall down the same paths of, he opened the door and saw end of chapter, that kind of stuff. I mean, you can do it that way, and that's fine. And I'm probably guilty of it. I mean, I am guilty of it myself. But there are many ways to create suspense and tension, and to boil it down to a simple formula, it's question marks. I once did a masterclass talking about suspense, and the title of it was why is a question mark shaped like a hook? And the reason is because if you pose a question in the mind of the reader and then delay giving them the answer, the question mark is like a hook that pulls them through the story. And the very fact that you pose a question and delay answering it creates tension. It creates a bit of expectation and gives the reader impetus, or the viewer who works for TV and film as well, the impetus to kind of read on or watch on or not turn over, because you want to know. We're curious animals, we want to know the answer. If you pose an interesting question and then suggest you are going to give them the answer, but don't give it to them, that creates tension and suspense as well, on a minor level. But I think people get very hung up with twists and big twists and big plot devices. But in actual fact, every good book is full of, constant twists, constant bits of where you confound the reader's expectation, where the reader thinks is going on one direction and it just pivots, like a character suddenly who you think is mean comes home and is really lovely to their dog. And things like, you go, oh, that's surprising. And each of those things creates suspense and tension, not on a massive level, but again, the sort of agglomeration of all these things means that the whole experience of your book is an engaging one. because you are creating a feeling in the reader, of expectation. I mean, that's all suspense is really. It's an expectation of something happening. And you do that with questions, little questions, posing little questions. And the other thing I would say, and this just goes not just for suspense, but action and everything, is if you're writing, you should always, if you're writing a certain book, so like when I was writing Sanctus, I knew I needed certain things. And so I grabbed a bunch of books that I'd read before and really had impressed me or I'd admired as a reader, and I reread them, but I read them knowing what the story was and not sort of just being focused on what happened next, which is the kind of the main engine of any story. I read them forensically and just went, right, okay, how does this author do action? Why are those action sequences so good? How long are the sentences? What kind of words are used? Are they monosyllabic? I honestly was counting syllables and words and just looking on a page of how it's laid out, because it's writing is a craft as well. So I would I would get a bunch of books, and for suspense, like think of the best suspense book you've ever read, and reread it. But don't read it to find out what happens. Read it and look at how they did it. Pull it apart. All writers steal, and you might as well steal from the best. So pick the best suspense book you've ever read and read it and just pull it apart and go, how did the writer do that? With language, with pace, with imagery, with sentence construction, with all of that, and just copy it.
Wow, that's
no one will ever know who you've stolen it from. But always steal from good people.
That's a very useful piece of advice, actually. Yeah, people can, try to read it forensically and see how the other authors structure the whole story and how they present it. And actually, that leads to another question that I want to ask that relates to reading more books. Do you think reading more books will limit your creativity as a writer?
No, quite the opposite. I think people, I understand where the question comes from, in the sense that you feel like if you read too many things, then when you try and come up with your own story, you'll go, oh, it's already been done. But the thing is, and here's a bit of a spoiler, it has already been done. Somewhere, something similar will pop up. When I was writing Sanctus, I sort of had this idea, and weirdly, halfway through writing it, the Da Vinci Code exploded, and it was a crash and dash thriller, multiple locations, a religious mystery at the heart of it, and I just thought, oh god, no, that's what it is. So I bought it and speed read it, and I just thought, well, yeah, okay, there's monks, I've got monks, there's a ancient religious artifact mystery, I've got that, and so and I could very easily have just gone, oh well, it's been done, but you just go, no, because the thing you've got to remember is no one's written it the way you write it, no one's told that story the way you tell it, and actually going back to the whole where do ideas come from is, ideas are overrated. People are obsessed with, an original idea. We need an original idea. But like, for example, one of the best books I read last year was a book called Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Sean Cosby, American writer. And the story is a getaway driver who's short of cash is pulled in to do one last job before he finally hangs up his criminal credentials. That story, not original, but it doesn't matter, because his voice, the way he tells the story, the characters this story happens to, are so fresh that you don't care. You don't care that you may have seen this story before or read it before, because you haven't read that particular story. And so I think reading lots of books, and in different genres, and anything that interests you, really, anything that piques your curiosity, anything that you feel is worthy of your time, because reading takes a while. I would just do it and not worry about it, because even I like lots of times with my books, and I've told you today a couple of specific examples of stuff that has directly inspired my stories, or a couple of my books, but no one can tell And it's the same if you read a book and there's something in it that you go, oh, that's that piece of like information or that character, I'll do a version of that character. No one will know where it came from unless you tell them. It doesn't matter, because you'll filter it through your own sensibilities, and you will add your own life experiences, and you will explore your own questions through the course of a book. I mean, that's the glory of writing, really. It's very therapeutic. So I would really, I mean, the key to being a good writer is to read a lot and write a lot and repeat. That's it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, read a lot and write a lot. And every writer has their very own writing style, so we can always have original work. Okay, one more question about formulating or creating a story. The question is like this. You've talked about how your inspirations lead you through a story as you answer the questions it generates. Have you ever started out with a concrete ending and engineered a story from there?
Yeah, in fact, most of the time, that initial spark of an idea sets up a situation. Or an idea. So like with Sanctus, when I told you about that, with a man is a god in ruins, and Rouen as a place, and what if Rouen was a place, and what if there was something there? So that very quickly, with the kind of asking what was there, what was the secret, what is what is in Rouen, became the end. I suddenly kind of thought, okay, I've got a secret that's held in a monastery. That has been looked after by this bunch of monks, this order of monks for millennia, and new novices go in, and they die in there. No one ever comes out, and so for centuries, that's how the secret was kept. But now we're in a modern age, where a piece of information could go around the world in seconds. And so how do you keep that secret then? And so I kind of figured out that there was a place and a secret within it. And, ultimately someone was going to find, and I figured out what the secret was. The thing in it is called the sacrament. And that's how it's referred to, but what is the sacrament? And I worked, and as I said, I reverse engineered it effectively. I went, well, that's the end. That's the secret. Who would be, and our other job certainly as a thriller writer or a crime writer is you sort of want to create the most appealing and engaging character you can, and then you make really horrible things happen to them. You make life really difficult for them, because again, that's where the tension is, that's where the collision is, that's where the sort of the tension, the drama comes from. And so with that, I worked backwards and went, okay, and like I said, it's like, okay, you've got this thing that's been kept by an order of monks who all have long beards to sort of, demonstrate their maleness. Who would be the hardest person that could find out what that secret was? And the answer was a woman. And so, and so then you start off with like, well, who is she? How is she tied into this? And by just thinking about it and thinking of, answering questions, posing questions and answering them, you start to get kind of little points along the way of your book. You have a start. I often then have a start and an end, but I normally know the end. I normally know where I'm aiming for, even if I don't know anything about the middle. I'll have an end point. I'll have a mystery that needs to be uncovered. I need a question that needs to be answered, and then I'll figure out where to start it. And I often plot maybe the first 50 pages or something, which is probably maybe 3 or 4 chapters, just to establish the characters, put their feet on, start them and put them in motion effectively, set the board out. And then I get to a point normally about 100 pages in, which is a bit like standing on the edge of a cliff, because you've got land behind you of what you've written. And then you've got this thing on the horizon, which is your end point. And you look down and there's this sort of abyss of mist with occasional sort of things rising out of it, of like, I need to get to there and need to discover that. And then you figure out your way through the valley of mist towards the end. And I know a lot of authors do that. A lot of authors at least know the end, even if they don't know anything else. And they'll just sort of start and write towards that ending. I mean, it works for me. But with all of this stuff, as as long as you finish with a book, as long as you get a book at the end of it, it doesn't matter. There are no wrong ways of doing it. So even though I can reveal bits about my process, don't ever think, oh, well, I don't do that, therefore I'm doing it wrong, because he's published and I'm not. Because there is no right. The great and the terrible thing about writing is there is no right way to do it, other than to read a lot and write a lot.
Yeah, again, read a lot and write a lot, and every road leads to Rome. As long as you start, you will find a way to finish it. And I'm sure we've learned a lot from your answers and your sharing. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Simon again. Thank you so much. I know we have more questions actually, but because due to the time limit, and sadly we have to wrap up this session. And thank you so much once again, Simon. And we want to congratulate you as well on your well-deserved success for Dark Objects. The novel has only been available for 1 month, and it's already been a big hit. And thank you so much, and congratulations to you. Hold on. So before we wave goodbye to you, we would like to, once again, on behalf of Book Depository and the Hong Kong Book Fair, thank you so much, Simon Toyne, for joining us today, as well as all of our participants joining us both at the fair and online at home, especially those of you who have been posting questions and interacting with us on the social media platforms. 咁喺呢度咧，再一次多謝大家參與我哋今日嘅讀書，我哋嘅閱讀分享會喺呢度咧都要再一次咧代表 Book Depository 啦，同埋香港書展，多謝咁多位朋友嘅出席，亦都多謝我哋嘅作者 Simon Toyne 咧，同我哋分享咗咁多噶。同一時間咧都要多謝現場同埋網上參與嘅每一位朋友，多謝你哋咧同我哋咁多嘅互動啦，亦都如果你哋出席咗3場嘅分享會咧，更加係感謝你哋嘅支持噶。Now, before we go, we would like to encourage everyone to keep your support for Book Depository and to remember to take your flyers and head over to the booth at Hall 1, 1CA16 to redeem your exclusive 20% off discount voucher on Simon's full collection. 咁喺度咧，再一次呼籲大家咧支持 Book Depository 啦，繼續咧要多啲踴躍咁樣支持。離開嘅時候咧，記住攞埋你哋嘅宣傳單張，去到我哋嘅展覽廳 1CA16 嘅攤位，只要喺書展嘅期間咧，都可以用呢一個嘅優惠券，用獨家嘅8折優惠購買咧我哋3位出席嘅作者所有嘅作品㗎。So thank you once again, Simon. Let's wave goodbye, and thanks, Simon, for joining us today and all the presentation sharing and all the tips. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.